put our pulse on the nation and find out if indeed we have a healthy heartbeat, or maybe we're in ICU, but we'll get to that. And to have that conversation with me this morning, I have Honorable Farah Maalim and George Kithi, who is an advocate. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning on State of the Nation. Just a quick reminder that you're welcome to participate in the conversation as well. The hashtag is Morning Express KTN. If you'd like to tweet, you can do that, and the Twitter handles are going to be displayed as we carry on. Would like to start off with Parliament having gone back into session. I believe it was on Tuesday, but had to go back into recess. And this is mainly to do with various committees that are to be formed. Let me start with you, Honorable Farah Maalim, on your thoughts on where we are, because we have NASA on one end pushing and saying, initially they started with a boycott and had not forwarded their names. They made requests that they should be given time to forward those names. Jubilee, on the other hand, are saying that, you know what, there was time and we're ready to go on. Where are we leading this country to, given that kind of stalemate?
I think there is a crisis. If the opposition chooses not to participate in the committees, there are certain committees that must be chaired by the opposition. And then that the Public Investments Committee and the Public Accounts Committee are two committees. They're very critical because they're supposed to have numbers that give the majority to the opposition. Ideally. We have tried to destroy these institutions very, very consistently for a very long time now. Because even the manner in which you're going to choose the leadership of those committees the practices are there. We were using the Westminster practice, which means the opposition within itself is going to determine who's going to be the leader. But I think in the last parliament, that was flouted a bit. They allowed the whole plenary of the committee to determine who. And then in that case, because these are committees, watchdog committees, that are supposed to be watchdogs, public watchdogs, on the government of the day, because one is on investments and the other one is on accounts. Now, if they are allowed to choose the leadership of those committees, then they will go and look for somebody who is favorable to them. So they're not allowed. Ordinarily, they should not be involved in the process of determining the leader, the chair of any of those two committees. That has to be done by the opposition caucus.
Correct. But the argument then from Jubilee, I guess, would be that NASA made a deliberate decision not to be there.
I agree with you. So there's a lacuna. That has never been provided for, both in the standing orders as well as in the laws. Not in the Constitution, not in the statutes, to the best of my recollection. So it's a lacuna. It's a crisis.
Okay.
How to deal with it is going to be
it's a different story.
Different issue, yes.
Let me bring in George on this. And George, your thoughts on, is it really a crisis, or is there a legal maneuver that there is for that? Given that the law is set and, you know, it is clear, or rather in Kenya now, the law being clear has been used depending on which side you're arguing from. Is it clear on this particular case?
Well, thank you. First, everything stems from the Constitution, whichever law, whether a standing order, whether a rule, a law, it must work under the Constitution. Let's not forget that government in the Constitution is envisaged to have three arms. That's the legislature, the executive, and judiciary. For purpose of the legislature, which is the issue we're discussing here, everybody is in government, everyone, for purposes of the Constitution. Because when you're a member of parliament, then you work and discharge your responsibility within an arm of government. But then, under that arm of government, there are certain rules of operations, which then will be christened standing orders and so on and so forth. Those standing orders do not take away the spirit of the Constitution, the organization rules upon which the functions of the parliament is organized. So, the closest we have to the partitioning of parliament and both houses into an opposition and government, so to speak, within the scope of that ordinary parlance of the word government, will be the leader of opposition, leader of majority and minority. Then we have the whips and so on and so forth. Now, in exercise of that functionalities too, just like, just for Mwananchi to understand, just like in any other corporations where we have committees of a board discussing something and bringing the issue to the full board upon which that can be dispensed with, there are certain committees that have been put in Parliament in that parity of reasoning, so that then when business is sieved and discussed, it is brought to the main house, upon which a report is made, adopted, is varied, and so on and so forth. Now, those must be to organize, in fact, to enhance the functions of Parliament, and not to limit the functions of Parliament,
Correct.
as far as the Constitution is concerned. So if those rules subvert the end of the Constitution and the end of the intent of Kenyans and Article 1 of sovereignty, then something must be wrong. But the independence of that institution, again, in terms of what and what cannot be done outside the other arms of government, comes into play. For instance, you can't impose an order from court to determine the functionalities within the house itself. Yet, you can still interpret the constitutionality of the rules as guiding the functionalities of an institution such as Parliament. Now, the sum total of that narrative is this. What is the intent of the functionalities of Parliament within the scope of the Constitution? It is simply to discharge its mandate in the context of the roles set out for Parliament under the Constitution.
Okay, and every function has a role, and I'd like us to listen into what basically the proceedings were and where it was, but let's listen into that before we continue with this conversation.
I want to confirm that this afternoon, the Speaker of the National Assembly, Justin Muturi, gave an indicator that he has received a number of memorandums which he was not in a position to execute him from the order of the House because we do not have the relevant committees in.
Let us put away the interests of a party that we support and put the interests of Kenyans together so that we can come together, form committees, so that we can continue to discharge our duties to Kenyans as members of Parliament and as a House as a whole.
Honorable Farah Maalim, and looking at the situation we have in Kenya, we have gotten to a point where we literally are using the law for left, right, and center, whereas our problem may be more political than legal.
You see, the entire construct of the system we're using right now here, or any system that exists anywhere in a nation or a state, is political. You see, the arrangement, the role of the different arms of the government, this is all has been decided through a political process. That is the underpinning. That's the history of this thing. Now, let me tell you, it's important to understand what is the spirit and the object of putting these institutions in place.
Correct.
There are three sanctified functions of a state, not a government. There's a government which has got the monopoly of power. It has enormous power, it has the money, it has the firepower, it has the weapons, it has everything else. And then to restrain that, you have the rule of law. And the rule of law, this emphasizes that it's an impersonal state in the sense that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you are the president's son or the queen's daughter or you are the minister's son or you're an ordinary
You're not
citizen.
above the law.
The rule of law, nobody's above the law,
Right.
and nobody is below the law, by the way. We all,
It levels us,
exist
gives us a
within
level
the law,
playing
yes,
field.
within the law, yes. And then there's what's called the democratic accountability. That democratic accountability is basically the functions of Parliament here. Those two arms, the rule of law and the democratic accountability, is supposed to constrain or restrain the abuse of that enormous power. See, the government is power, and that power must be restrained. And that's what Parliament is supposed to do. And that's why the role of the opposition in Parliament is so sanctified, you can say it's the basis of the whole democracy we're exercising right now. You take that away, then you don't have any accountability. If you collapse all that into, that's why there is always and of course when it comes to that, and the two of them now are in conflict, you go to the judiciary for purposes, that's why we say the rule of law. for them to interpret the law and to be able to arbitrate on these things. But you see, when you have an executive that is, one, has a tyranny of numbers in a certain institution, legitimately or illegitimately, we don't know. There's so many...
There's questions around that.
There's so many questions around there. There's so many, what you call, petitions up there, and let's see how this works out. You have that power. And then you have a system that essentially also rubbishes the judiciary. And you've seen how the system has rubbished the judiciary itself here now. And then you have a parliament right now that says, okay, because we have the numbers, if these opposition people do not exercise their own roles, and they choose, we will carry out without them. Now, that is essentially what we have to try and fight. The biggest problem in a democracy is that enormous power that is in the hands of the executive that can be used properly, but can also be misused. And the moment you now give that carte blanche, you give an open check to the executive, then the executive will emasculate the judiciary, it will emasculate what you call the legislature, and then you have what you call despotism. And that's what happens. And by the way, you can have a democratic despotism. And that's essentially what we had ourselves in the first government, the second government, until we repealed the Section 2A. So I do understand there's a crisis, and in a crisis, what is needed is sobriety for people to sit down, because you do not destroy one because you want to achieve another one. It's important for Parliament to function. It's very important for these committees to go and play their role in there. But at the same time, it's important to be able to engage in a lot of negotiations within the parliamentarians themselves to try and save the institution itself. Because if these people choose completely not to participate in this, and then you go and form committees without them, then it's not a parliament anymore.
It's no longer parliament.
You no longer have the constraints to power, because parliament is a constraint to power. It's a lawmaking body that is supposed to constrain the excesses of the executive here. When you have this now rolled into one, then we have a problem.
Okay, George, I bring you in at this point, and there's been the debate of legality and legitimacy, and this would be another subject that probably would leave Kenyans wondering whether even that parliament would be legitimate, even in decisions that they make. But from a legal perspective, is there a solution to if Jubilee decided that we'll go ahead without NASA in the committees? Because evidently, part of the reason why, first of all, there is the question of just inclusivity, which we'll come to. And having both NASA and Jubilee, or let me say government and opposition in those committees, is really part of representation. Is there a legal...
I think these are very interesting times. For purpose of jurisprudence and the parliamentary house business and the precedent that we're setting. And I think what you're doing is we are testing our environment. I hope this does not degenerate into something that is tragic. But the test that we're going through is very important, because it is this test that then enhances our democracy, solidifies it, and defines it, because then we can't define and delineate the boundaries of the power without knowing the excesses. It's until you legislate on the mischief on excesses, because you have perceived the excesses through experience such as what is going on. Now, what I do think is first and foremost, let's lay the basis of all this. The opposition is not getting involved in the committees because it's part of a protest. That protest is a political protest. It is not necessarily a legal protest. What I'm deriving to is the circumstances we're in now is a friction between law and politics. You see, when we legislate, first put it this way, at a point in time, there was never Kenya. Okay? Then Kenya came to be on account of an agreement that was probably a build-up of laws up to where we are. That becomes then a history of sorts. Now, as to where we are, the question is that of chicken and egg. In a sense, is what then guides us? Is it the law that we put into place, or the politics that led into law? Because you see, we have a law, but the law has to serve us as having put it together to create the social order.
The law was made by people for the people.
For social order, in a sense.
For social order.
But then, how about if the law does not work for the people, but works for the people in half and half. You see, the people in this country today, they believe the law has to be followed to the letter. And they're right about that. And then there's a group of people in this country who believe the law does not work for us, and it must work for us or be made to work for us. Thus, then the friction between law and politics. You see, an election is a political process anyway, whichever you look at it, but within certain confines of rules. Well, although they say there are no rules in politics, yes, there are rules, because they're confined to certain issues. That is the path towards which power is assumed, whichever level, either at MCA level or at presidential level, all right? So ultimately, we have to check as to how the law is going to relate with politics. The politics of the day is such that at a point, if we are not careful, politics will override the law. In this sense, that notwithstanding the circumstances, a president has been elected, a member of parliament has been elected, but the politics of the day do not recognize that process. It doesn't fuse into the hegemon that was supposedly created in the Constitution. What am I trying to say there? For that, ultimately, we need to have a situation of an equilibrium where the law survives with the politics, like they work together. If we don't get there, then certainly politics, being the maker of law, will have to override the law.
Will take the day.
Yes.
Sir, looking at that kind of situation and where we are today, and aren't our politicians taking advantage of the politics of the day to their own advantage? At the end of the day, how is this working for Kenya? How is this working for Wanjiku?
Let me tell you one thing. First of all, I really want to commend the expose that was done by Kithia. And it's good to have people like this to come to such debates, because he's looking at the totality, he's looking at posterity, he's looking at the history. And it's a beautiful thing. And that's what we have to look at in Kenya. We don't have to look for a quick fix. We don't have to look for a quick fix. We are basically setting the groundwork or the foundation for posterity for this country. The same way when in the making of the American Constitution, you know how many years, the best minds, the very best minds, Madison, Jefferson, you know, all those people had this, what you call the Federalist Papers, and that massive debate for 13 years. Now, for us to try and get a very quick fix into this problem right now is a problem. And for us to say, how do we have a quick fix? There's no quick fix to this. There's no quick fix. Exactly as he puts it. There are too many dimensions. You see, the foundation of the system we have right now, which has to have an equilibrium, basically balancing themselves. The three arms of the government have got to be independent but interdependent, and each one is able to check on the other one. And within that also, you have a system. Now, if you say, no, look, we have a problem, opposition is doing these things, these people have boycotted, let's look for a solution to these things, and let's do it politically, go to parliament and change the law. That's the very easy way that third world countries, particularly African countries, have always handled these things, including the election laws that we tried to change last time, so that we can have... what I'm saying is that it's a crisis. There is a lacuna in the law. We've never had it in practice before. We have to be very sober about it, because there is no quick fix to it.
Do you think?
And for the first time, of course, it's politics. The whole thing, everything is grounded on politics.
I was going to ask, do you think our politicians are being sober?
They're being sober, very sober. I mean, there are very, very, very big questions that have got to be dealt with. Those big questions have impacted also on the practice of parliament itself, or the transaction of business in parliament itself. And all those things cannot be quickly fixed. I'm very happy for the first time, for the very first time in many years, I can see Muturi taking a decision right now and saying, let parliament go on recess while we sort out this thing. That's the manner in which we have to discuss these things. That's the manner. You know, there are people who are in a hurry to go to office very fast. There are people who are saying, no, you are not legitimately there. You can't go into this office because IBC was done, this was done, and they have a raft of issues. And they have a raft of evidence, massive, tons and tons of evidence. You get my point? Now, you can't get these things working without solving some of the very big questions. And as he puts it, politics is the basis for the institutions of the government that we're using right now. And if the politics itself is not fixed, To the extent a section of the society in Kenya is saying, we're going to secede because this is a form of colonialism. We're not going to accept when we're going to be colonized by two communities for eternity. You get my point? And let's have two different states, if that's how they want it. And a section says that, no, you've got to accept the results. And they say, no, we can't accept the results because of all these illegalities and irregularities and the rest of it. And too many things. You get my point?
Right.
I don't want to pass judgment on any, to be honest to you. At the stage we are right now, we are looking at a very fragile situation. We want to try and keep our country together. We want to try and build these institutions and develop them on a firm basis that can be bequeathed to our great-grandchildren, that we can talk about this meeting we have had now 200 years down the line. You see what I mean? And say this is basically how we got there. But so it is not good for anybody to come up with a blanket statement and say, if they don't like this, we will do this, or if they don't like this, we will do this.
All right.
I mean, those are the kind of things. Nobody has answers for information. It's a crisis.
It's a crisis.
It's a crisis.
Do you agree, George, that it is
it's a crisis? Jurisprudential. Basically, it's a serious. I mean, it's important for people to go back. It's a political crisis. It's a question of legitimacy. There are too many questions here.
Very many questions. All right, George, let me bring you in here. And is it really a crisis? And secondly, this is also playing into the fact of, or the question of inclusivity. When we look at Parliament, one of the things that, one of the reasons why Jubilee, for instance, will say that we'll go ahead is because they have what now in Kenya, which I think is a uniquely Kenyan statement, tyranny of numbers. Because really democracy is about numbers. Democracy takes the day because you have the numbers. But in Kenya, it has been termed as tyranny because it is used sometimes in a tyrannical manner, depending on which side you are. So anyway, coming back to inclusivity and cessation, are we in a crisis place, or are we still at a point where we can sit down, have a conversation? And when we talk about inclusivity, what is inclusivity? In Kenya, we have reduced it to ethnicity, whereby we have your person as a cabinet secretary, for example, or if we get into government, we'll take care of your people. What is inclusivity?
Well, good question. But you see, if you're driving a car and it's sliding, it's mudding, you have no control, right? The car slides, but you have to hang on there or the steering.
And wait
but you have no control of what happens to it.
Just get off the
It's the terrain that has been created before you even got there. You see, democracy has never been a solution. Yet, it is supposed to be the solution. And this is what I mean. You know, every 5 years, we go through what we call a democratic election. But in that election, we ask our people, through that call for democracy, to divide themselves. That's what we do. All right? So we partition ourselves into biases. So what is the immediate, most available way of partitioning, of dividing ourselves?
Tribes.
It's tribes. Anything wrong with it? Nothing wrong at all. In fact, ethnicity in that respect then is available for us to exploit in a political process. Now, if Mr. Maalim is vying for presidency, what am I supposed to do? I've sat with him, he's a gentleman, he's a good man, he's given me business. When I do business with him, I vote for him. He is from my community, I vote for him. So the solemnity as to choice has never been a discretion that is fettered. It is upon you to choose. So you vote for a person if it's your husband, it's your brother. But largely, if you move from the smallest unit, which is family, you move to ethnicity. But it brings a bigger question, which brings me to your question. When you're born in your community, who are you? First, you yourself. You're somebody's son and mother. You have a mother and a father.
From a certain family.
That is the unit. Then you move to a clan. In some communities, the clan structure is so strong that if you leave the ethnic issue, they themselves can't agree. Then you move to a tribe. So before you become a Kenyan, you are your own ethnic community. So you come to learn about Kenya through a school, through a process, and through a landmass, you come, which is defined and delineated many years ago. So what is so important about being a Kenyan before you become an ethnic, you belong to a certain ethnic grouping? So then if you grow in that setup, which is completely a tie that is unbroken by education, poverty still restricts that, practices and customs still restrict that, Then if you come to the bigger picture of competition, where you've gone to school, you've gone to university, you're a primary teacher, you are a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a politician, what is beholden to you? We've again balkanized our country in those fiefdoms called wards, called counties, called parliamentary, constituencies and all that. What does that mean? It means we've again defined those in respect to the ethnic groupings. We have Kisii staying here, we have Luo staying here, and so on and so forth. What then does that mean when we come to a presidential election? I'm beholden to my ethnicity. Ultimately, we have institutionalized ethnicity. In fact, what we've said, there'll be ethnic balancing. So it doesn't matter whether somebody is merited or not. You become a chief just because you're a Kisii. Otherwise, the rest should be a Kikuyu and on and so forth. That's the truth. And then when you come to parliament too, and other institutions, that ethnicity is balanced against gender and all. The rest are good. But because it's ethnicity, we have to agree that ethnicity is here to stay with us until so many years to come.
So are you saying that we should accept that as it is now is how it's going to be, and even having that discussion is not necessary?
No. Clever people are those who look for situations to manage themselves. In fact, rules are there and laws are there to manage yourselves. So Jubilee has tiny numbers on account of the ethnic communities having been brought together in a certain grouping, and that is not even permanent, by the way. 2022, it's possible to have a complete different situation. A tyrant of numbers does not stay with the communities that are there. It may shift to some other people, and so on and so forth. That is something that keeps on evolving every time. Meaning that it is something that we keep on dealing with every 5-year cycle, whether we like it or not. But the biggest problem is not even that. The biggest problem is the constitution we put up together. That is the biggest problem. It is an instrument that was supposed to guide us, although untested, but it was left to lawyers, it was left to activists, and to some extent, those that were already in power. The control of the law then as to its making was not Wanjiku's. Ultimately, it was made for people that then thought the positions are beholden to themselves. I'll give you an example. For instance, give me a reason why the position of Prime Minister was removed. Now, the position of Prime Minister was a very good fallback because of our ethnic circumstances. You need to expand the executive as much as possible for that inclusivity to be seen. Because inclusivity is not per se a constructive issue, it's a perception. So then, if I fail to be included, it's because Farah Maalim is up there and he represents me. Because this is representative democracy at the end of the day. All right? So then, ethnicity, the good and the bad of it is how we manage it ultimately.
Okay. Honorable Farah Maalim, is an expansion of the executive a solution to our inclusivity issue and problem?
You see, I want us to, as much as possible, lay the foundation to be able to get away from the constructs that were initially imposed on us by the colonial system that was here, which was divide to rule so that ethnicity was propounded and amplified. And then subsequent leadership in the country also used that. Instead of, if you remember very well, the moment we got independence, shortly after that, there was supposed to be a Gema. And Gema essentially was the Gikuyu, Embu, Meru, Akamba Association, by the way. The last A was not an association. It's just the Akambas, basically, who had said, Paul Ngei and the rest of them said, we don't want to be part of it, for whatever reasons. But the idea at that time was to put together a majority to exercise that tyranny and to exercise that massive overload over the rest of the country. So basically, the idea within the first, what you call founding father of this country and the people who are around him, was to turn this from a British colonial state in which the white settlers were basically the upper class, and to reduce the rest of us now into a permanent underclass and elevate an ethnic, what you call, a construct to become the permanent, overlords for us for eternity. Then, of course, subsequent ones, everybody, Mr. Kamatusa, whatever that came out again later on, too many of them came out in the same thing. What we need to do is to try and not accommodate this, as he puts it, these things are never permanent. By the way, nobody can exercise on his own as an ethnic community without creating that conglomeration of different ethnicities can become, because the biggest community in here, the Kikuyu. The Kikuyu are what, 20%, 19%, about that number of the population. That is still, you still have 80% of the rest of the country from other different ethnic communities. Now, for us to be able to get away progressively from this and come together on an ideological basis, on even friendship basis, on even people who basically feel that they can do business together, we need to begin getting away from that. We are not going to look for a system that will give that inclusivity and say, okay, this system can take care of the four corners of the country in terms of appointments to positions, which does not necessarily translate into development for those ethnic communities. You know, for example, I say pastoralists are supposed to be the poorest in this country right now. But look at what you've had. For 24 years, we had a pastoralist as the president of this country. That was Daniel Arap Moi. And we've had, as I told you, a pastoralist also as the vice president. We've had Murumbi, who was more of a pastoralist because he had his Maasai identity more. It doesn't. It has not benefited. It has not benefited the people. It doesn't. So the important thing is if you can have ideological persuasion, people to be able to congregate on the basis of that, and we have clear delineations what this caucus stands for in terms of development and what this caucus or party stands for in terms of development. So that Kenyans can begin seeing where their interest lies best. Is it the program of these people or the program of these other people? All right. But you look at the manifestos of right now, the different political parties, each one of them is almost a carbon copy of the other one. You understand my point? So we need to get away from that. I don't want us to, I agree with my learned friend here on the issue that basically we allowed the Constitution itself to be done in the manner it was done. It's true, this Constitution has got a few things that needs to be corrected, but that's how all constitutions are. The first constitution is purely a basis, a foundation, as a constitution. And then you can have the American Constitution has had, what, 37 or 40 amendments? Yes. Okay, in as many years, 200 years, which is fair. But then the whole constitution, the American Constitution is about, what, 37 pages? Yeah. Have you seen how small it is? Or 40 pages, something like that. So what I'm saying is that we can still knock those ones into shape again. I do agree with him that we need to have a parliamentary system in here. This very powerful office of the presidency, where somebody has the key to whether to consign you into poverty for the rest of your life or to make you a super class. You get my point? A super class.
So is the solution an expanded executive, which we also know that the church has come out in?
No, we have to change the system. The system has to be changed. The system, we have to have a ceremonial president. You get my point? And we have a prime minister who is accountable to the people in the floor of the house, who also is accountable because of the numbers of members of parliament that you are looking for. You are definitely forced to have your influence in the four corners of the country.
All right. George, and we are not too far from finishing, but looking at the country and looking at the 5-year cycle that you're talking about, where every 5 years we are, and I'm not sure if it's even 5 years, or even through the period of 5 years, we have our politicians still, sort of balkanizing and bringing in the ethnic narrative. How do we get out of it, given that even our current situation right now has a lot of ethnicity written all over it, and even the current political crisis that we have has a lot of ethnicity written all around it, and it looks like the only way out will be a conversation around that ethnicity. Are we ever going to snap out of it?
Yes, we will. It's very easy, by the way, to fix it. When you go to America, you have to appeal to the black, you have to appeal to the white,
the Latinos.
You have to appeal to them.
Everyone.
And how you campaign to them must be customized, a message that's customized to them. If it's immigration, if it's the right to worship, anything. Yeah. Sometimes it's a community that engages in gay relationships and so on, and you have to appeal to that because you want the votes anyway. So it is not difficult and shouldn't be difficult to manage ethnicity. You remember, and by the way, Kenyans largely up to now, up to where we are, let's agree, have played by the rules. Meaning that as much as possible, we try to refrain and constrain ourselves within the delineation of the Constitution. No government so far has been formed outside the Constitution. Every dispute has been contested in the confines of the Constitution. Yes, there has been picketing and demonstrations, which again is very irritant to some people, but you know what? It is within the Constitution all the same. Today, we are in the Supreme Court within the confines of the Constitution. So give it to Kenyans as much as possible as we speak. We don't know what tomorrow brings, but as we speak, Kenyans have been within the confines of the law. If that is true, and if that will be the game until the time we get a solution, whichever solution, let's put it this way, that if we fix the rules, then we're home and dry. Which means this, yes, I do agree that there's something that needs to be done to the executive. You see, what we tried to do in the last constitution, and I must say it has failed, is that we've tried to take away a lot of power from the executive and spread it in institutions and so on and so forth, hoping that the attraction and the trappings that it has will decimate. And then Kenyans will look at their governors and devolution as the solution. Whereas there was an attempt to look at that as a solution, because the calmness we have now, believe you me, is because of devolution. Somehow, somewhat, we're beholden to the little that we hold on to in devolution and our governors and our system. Otherwise, if there was nothing like that, I do know the pressure, the hates, the temperatures, the political temperature will be what we have now. So yes, to that extent, then we have spread the contentment of Kenyans in as far as the affairs are concerned, because somehow the roads, the hospitals and what, we can manage that. But again, we haven't demystified the institution of executive so far. We still are beholden to the power we've put in there, and we want it by all means. It shouldn't be that way. So we haven't fixed what we wanted to fix.
So in your opening remarks to this, you say that it's not that difficult. What is the solution?
Yes, we need then to relook at balancing and spread of resources. It's all about resources and what is in it for me, ultimately. Because ethnicity is my belonging. Break it down to whatever level you want downwards, but again, it's a question of belonging.
But isn't devolution what was supposed to sort out the resources issue? Because now we've moved it from the national government to the county government.
Like I said, we've seen how devolution has worked. It means there's more to be done to get to where we wanted to be in the first place. Devolution has taken us thus far. Like I said, the seeming, we've somehow halted somewhere and watching. The reason for that is we have our own affairs to deal with at the devolution level. And I do think that's very good for Kenyans. But it doesn't mean that the heat and the attention given to the executive in the manner it's being given has been solved. And yet that is what we wanted to solve. Okay. So ultimately, yes, we need to solve the executive so that then we either still move certain powers from it, still within the executive, but spread it horizontally, or still sink it much more and take it to institutions as we have created in devolution. Something still needs to be fixed to fix ethnicity.
All right.
You see, as Mr. Kithi puts it, devolution has taken away certain heat from the center. I can assure you, if we did not have devolution, and we were where we were in 2007, this country will be a different country altogether today. So that has taken, everybody saying, well, even if we have issues at the center, we still have our small thing here. That's why everybody is now running to the governors and running to the counties to be able to. Now, that impunity, that excessive abuse of power itself at the center, which has not disappeared, by the way, is still there, in whichever way you use it. I've told you that you need to have, as part of the rule of law here, you have to have an impersonal system, where meritocracy is basically the catchword. Where, and they say that, I mean, this has been tested as far back as the 3rd century. The Ming dynasty in China, one of the reasons why the Chinese are very successful with all the odds against them, with 1.3 billion people, is that fact. You never see a Chinese leader who has his son or his daughter somewhere within that, what they call power corridors and the rest of it. No. It's all the person who can best do this job.
Okay.
Now, what I'm trying to tell you is that because of the failure for us to do it and to maintain that nepotism and maintain that friendships and then basically who has worked with me, who was in my party, and appointments to higher positions in the system itself, that has been replicated again at the county levels.
All right, so, sorry to cut you short, but because of time, could I get your closing comments on a solution? What do you see as a solution?
What I'm trying to tell you, as much as this county thing has taken some heat out of us, they are also boiling in their own sense. All of them are also boiling. They're also going to explode, by the way, sooner than later, particularly with the kind of riggings that were done and many governors who people believe are not there by right. So what I'm trying to say is that, look, I don't have an answer for this. What I have is, we did that in the parliament when Marenda was the speaker and I was the deputy speaker. Every time we had a crisis in parliament, we were, first of all, very independent. Extremely independent to the extent which, you know, it's not because we were from ODM that we were going to serve the agenda of ODM. No, we were serving the agenda of the country. Now, the moment that kind of trust is there on the leadership of Parliament itself, it's easy for that leadership to call both sides and come to a very good agreement on that.
The famous word dialogue.
Yeah, yes.
George, your closing comments. We are really out of time.
Yes, the country needs to dialogue.
Yes, absolutely.
It's not to dialogue. But again, I think we need to come up with something, again, to Kenyans. It doesn't matter how many good laws you have. The bad manners has to go away. It honestly must. So with a practice within the confines of good law through and through, the bad manners goes away slowly. There are certain things that you can't do in public that used to be done in public. You have to hide today. That hiding must still be exposed so that we continue.
Raise the integrity level.
Yes. For instance, we the independence of media has really helped to be where we are today, and continuously other rights as we gain and try to build on them. Certainly, we have to.
One last word. You see, why our system is not delivering, is because you have a system in which is a razor thin wins. You have 52 or 53, which is even being contested. And somebody who had 47 has absolutely no power.
That's true.
You see what I mean?
Winner takes it all.
Winner takes all. So basically, it is that it's like, you know, we won this game. It's a 4-3. And we take the 3 points in soccer. That's where the problem is. So that's why I think we need to again one more time, study very well, very exhaustively, the system we have and see how it can best serve us.
All right.
Our own unique conditions.
And that's more important because, you see, as at the time somebody gets 43%, it's people's emotions invested.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you can't deal with emotions because
it's a constituency.
It's unreasonable.
It's almost a half of the country, and a half of the country cannot be left out for 5 years.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to wind up right there because of time. Thank you very much, Honorable Farah Maalim and George Kithi, for joining us this morning on State of the Nation. It is now just about 5 minutes to 8, and it's time for us to release KTN Home, and Life and Style begins. But for those of us on KTN News, we'll be right back with more stories making headlines, and that is the State of the Nation.